All right, sorry about that. Had a little bit of a crash. It happens all the time in live radio, and that just happened to hit us particularly hard. Welcome back. Sorry about that, Damon.
All good.
All right, so as I was saying before I was rudely interrupted, is we have a lot of questions coming in here, a lot from individuals that are in positions of leadership. And we've got, well, there's some good ones on here, actually. Now, I know that when working with a team, you got to, I mean, that's the hardest thing because you got to, we touched on a little bit in the last segment of keeping everyone kind of in focus and delegating the jobs properly. But here is the email, and I'm going to just let you respond to it. It says, oh, hang on. Where'd you go? Where'd you go? Where'd you go? There we go. Brené Brown is a well-respected researcher in the field of leadership. Much of her research has involved the American military. Do you subscribe to her perspectives on the role of shame and vulnerability play in effective leadership? Does that ring any bells?
To an extent, yes. But here's what I would say. Most leadership books, including Brené Brown's, are generally contextual. And here's what I mean. If you, as a leader, just read Brené Brown and you learn that being vulnerable and being empathetic is, the main trait that a leader will exhibit, it could easily be misinterpreted. And the danger is overly empathetic leaders aren't right for every situation, i.e., you could be in a crisis at which point it doesn't really pay to be super empathetic and to explore the why behind everything and to understand the way people are seeing it. That's the point for direct leadership that stimulates the team to do something they should be already good at. So I would say, all the books, Brene Brown, Simon Sinek, John Maxwell, they're all good to read, but just understand that in the broader context, I think what a good leader has to do is understand those traits or the theories or concepts that are put forward in these great books have to be employed in the right circumstances, and they're not necessarily a broad framework that works all the time. I think that applies to all of them. And I actually addressed that in the second book, You Don't Know Shit About Leadership, is, each one of those books has its strengths. But at the end of the day, if Brene Brown tells you, being empathetic and vulnerable is the way to be, and that's just 180 degrees out from your natural personality,
yeah,
that's going to be tough. So what you have to do is bridge the gap, find what works for you in that context, in that situation, because the leader you are today may the requirements may be different tomorrow. So you've got to be flexible. They're all good. Read them all. Read mine.
yeah.
But at the end of the day, it's a little more complicated than is it good or not.
I see books like these more like the tools on a tools chest, because you can take different techniques and aspects of them. You can apply them in different ways and in different situations, and that's basically what you know. Well, I think that's one of the most important things you can do. Actually, just like you said, just read them all, just kind of take it all in, take the good and
Well,
the bad, and
and
apply
that's
it.
exactly right.
Yeah.
My second book is basically that's what I do. What I try to do is look for I try to dissolve the concepts down to the most basic origin of why is empathy good, for example. So I explore neuroscience, psychology, evolutionary theory, complexity theory, to boil down, to extract the goodness from all of those books and create a flexible, sort of adaptable framework that people can use, the ballistic leadership framework. So it's all in there, but everything has to be taken in context of your own personality, the people you're leading, they all have personalities. And what is the requirement right now? Because the requirement might require a very empathetic leader, in which case, great.
Yeah.
But it might require a very direct leader, in which case that's not going to work.
So, what's the contrast between the two books? What's the most blaring contrast between the two books?
So the first book is a little more, it's a little more direct, and it just what I try to do in the first book is acknowledge that if you are truly interested in leadership, then the first thing you have to do is admit that you have room to grow. And what I think people do is they're very good at critiquing other people's leadership, but they have a harder time understanding where their own faults are. So I explore 11 sort of archetypes of leadership, from very benign, like just you're disorganized, all the way up to you are literally a bad person. It's dark triad traits: psychopathy, narcissism, Machiavellianism, all the way up to you're not incompetent. It's one of the incompetent numbers, but you're a bad leader in that you're so self-interested, you're bad for the company.
Yeah.
So that's the first book. The second book is, it's three parts. The first part is describing the state of leadership in general across the world. Any leadership surveys you do, what you typically get back, depending on what you ask, is about engagement. Is it about empathy? Is it about the leader's vision? They don't come. None of them come back all that great when you average them out. It's, 50 to 80% of the people think that their leadership is lacking in some way. The middle part is kind of a deep dive in the five lenses. I say evolutionary theory is one, neuroscience is one, personality theory, complexity theory, and even game theory. So
Mm.
I outline a chapter each on those. And the rest of the chapter is looking at what can we extract when you overlay all of those theories onto leadership. What is the end result? How does that translate into behaviors? Because we can explain the behaviors. Now, how does that translate into, as a leader, what are the things I do to get the best out of my team? And then I
Wow.
outline my ballistic leadership framework, considering those as sort of the roots of how I built it.
Yeah.
Working on trust, working on cohesion, confidence, and purpose. So that's basically that book.
Right. Well, that's really interesting because especially whenever it comes to teams, because that was one of the questions that's been asked. Actually, it says, ask him how, as a leader, he keeps his personal motivation, his mojo, if you like, leading people. Can be thankless at times. How do you, as a leader, keep your own motivation from flagging when you're always propping everyone else up and dealing with all the constant grind of other people's issues and doing it while trying to deliver expectations of your team, and of course, let's say, well, of course, your employer, because you have expectations there. It's going back to what I said about the hot seat. When you're in the hot seat, you're on hot seat. So how do you keep those teams motivated? How do you keep yourself motivated when you're propping everyone else up?
Yeah. So my job now is a perfect example of that. I'm the deputy chief of staff here at U.S. Africa Command. So our command headquarters here in Stuttgart, Germany, is basically the U.S. military's arm for Africa, a continent 3.5 times the size of the U.S. And as the deputy chief of staff, the chief of staff office is very small. It's like three people,
Yeah.
four people. But we are responsible for the outputs generally of the whole organization, in particular the major outputs, the outputs that are going to Washington D.C., or the big stuff, policy stuff. So in order to do that, I've got to work with the rest of the Africa Command headquarters, none of which actually work for me.
Right.
So that's a particular leadership challenge. One, it's leadership is challenging when you have your own team, and of course there's the drama, there's the hardship, the things that sort of distract you from leading. But another, I would argue, harder way to be a leader is to be in a situation where you have to lead people that don't necessarily answer to you. But back to the original question, there are a lot of distractions that take you off. For example, if we've got to achieve X goals or X output, but I can't even get there because I'm dealing with drama within the team, that requires some exploration. First of all, I would say, did you hire the right people? And the answer may be no. So you've got to build the team with the right personality traits,
Yeah.
that are complementary, that can work together to achieve the output. So the first thing is You may have people on your team that just need to go, and that's perfectly acceptable because there's another team somewhere that they'll be good on. It just may not be yours because everything is contextual. Personalities got to merge, and that's
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
Um, and the second thing is, again, you've got to know your team well enough to know when to take person X, be super empathetic, and you got to give that person 10 minutes every morning to let them talk about, whatever happened at home or whatever the case is. But you have to know that, because if you don't do that, for example, maybe that's going to eat them up until they can corner you sometime during your
Yeah.
lunch hour or whatever. But you just have to know the team, know what the pros and cons, who needs this, who needs that, how do I interact with these people, how do I interact with the team at large versus individuals. It's a hard problem to solve, and like I said, everybody's different. But consider some of your teammates may not be good for the team.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with you, especially that morning part of just kind of getting whether it's a group, like we used to have the morning briefings, just getting together, just running
Yeah.
through exactly what we're going to be going through with the day. And those little personal things will pop up in those briefings, like, oh, well, I'll have a little difficult time getting that through because there's something going on here. And you can kind of flag that kind of thing and go, all right, well, I want to see that person after we're done and that person after we're done,
Yeah.
just to get it out of the way so their head's right. And again, when they go into it, they can get their job done and they're not being blindsided, and you're not being blindsided in the middle of the day of having to prop them up. That gets exhausting on the leader himself or herself in many cases. What do you do to kind of decompress from all of that and pull back? Because I mean, it's propping everyone else up all the time it can be hard. Any personal things that you do that you would suggest for others to do?
I mean, I'm in the gym every day, so that's one. I would
Endorphins
say
is a
to
good one. Mm.
Yeah, you gotta pump up the endorphins. To some extent, it depends on your personality. Your personality may be well suited for that. So not everybody's like that. But if you do need an outlet, then you've got to have someone else on the team that you can sort of decompress to. I've got a few other colonels on the team that I don't work with every day, but they're sort of trusted friends I can go to, and every now and then, once every couple 3 weeks, they'll come down and we'll just sit and sort of vent and laugh about all the problems we've got, and working with X, Y, and Z people. I
Yeah.
mean, there's ways around it. If it's really bothering you, then I would examine your own approach to leadership and what you expect of yourself as a leader, because there are people that will demand your time, that will demand excess of your time than really should be required to get the job done.
Yeah.
In the military, because we're so focused on the importance of the individual soldier and making sure that soldiers have whatever they need, whether it's medical, dental, psychological help, everything, helping them get situated when they come to a new duty station, like all of that stuff. You've just got to be comfortable knowing that what you're doing is helping the team, because you're making that person's life easier. So you're reducing the uncertainty. You're facilitating a little bit of a safety net so they can not worry about certain things, so that they can focus on what needs to be done at work
Yeah.
in some circumstances. Yeah.
In these processes, is there anything that the people inside your team or working with teams, something that stands out where you can kind of see that they've got kind of a golden standard or something about them that you can kind of move them into higher positions? Is there something that stands out? Personality types? Like how do you siphon through that and identify these individuals?
So I look for two things. The first is how they approach problems. So as in my last job when I was a brigade commander, you have majors. So major is kind of a transition rank where you do a lot of heavy staff work. It's sort of your first exposure to being on a headquarters and being in charge of many things on the staff and within the headquarters and the outputs. So what I like to do is, and it's sort of a test, but it helps me understand the way they see the world, is assign them a problem that is presented in a rather vague manner, um, with a little bit of intent as to either, I just want you to explore this problem. What if we did a bunch of activities that I want this output. I know that sounds pretty vague. What if we put together, as an example, every lethal asset within a 300-mile radius and did a big exercise on this installation? That's very ambiguous. They don't necessarily know where to start. So I'd give them that problem and just see how far they could get exploring it with little guidance, using their own staff, because they've got the intent. They know what I want. Or I can give them, an article as an example. Say, hey, I want you to read this, just write some notes down and come back and talk to me about that article. And what I'm doing is I'm exploring what their approach to problem solving is. So if they come back and they say, yeah, we can't do that exercise, it's too big. I know for a fact that's not true. They probably didn't explore it very deeply.
Yeah.
Or the article, I can see, did they just write major points from the article down to talk to me about? Or did they have some original thoughts that maybe translate? There's a relation to Army doctrine, or there's a relation to something else that they can bridge that gap and conceptualize things a little better. And the reason I do that is because I've got to know what the baseline for giving these people problems is, so that I know how to get the best out of. They may need much more guidance, much more a rigid sort of intent on how to get what I want.
Yeah.
The second thing is, and it ties into that, is understanding their personalities. I've done that specific exercise with many majors. Here's a big problem. Go tell me if we can do this. One of them came back and had sort of a very basic plan. We kind of wrote some notes on it, do this, and we did about 5 iterations, and that person was getting very frustrated because in their mind, what they thought the process was, he's going to give me a problem, I'm going to give him an answer, and then we're done.
Yeah.
But the reality is, things that complex, you have to iterate on those things. That person left. I had a new major come in and did the same thing, and that person took off with it, and it turned into the biggest exercise Fort Carson had in probably a decade. We actually did it because this person understood the problem set and how to solve problems, but had a little more experience with that type of exercise. So a little bit of an advantage, but just the approach to problems. And this is now my problem. I can do something great with this. Just give me a couple weeks and I'll come back to you. So it's just a remarkable difference in personality, how they approach problem, personality characteristics.
Yeah. You talk about the ripple effect. Is this in the essence of the ripple effect? Whenever you test these people, you kind of see the ripple effect of good or bad?
Yeah, so it's a ripple effect, and what happens is they take that down, and they can't do it by themselves. So they've got to start calling outside the organization. So now you're building networks and you're creating allies outside of the organization. But they've also got to pull in those younger officers and explain not what I explained to them, but they've got to explain sort of the subdivided tasks down to those junior officers. So you're creating this network of problem solving that only makes the organization better at the end of the day. I mean, the same thing can be said for negative personality traits. If I do the same thing and they don't like the task because it's too vague, which some people are terrible with vague guidance.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they convey that and say, man, this is ridiculous. I don't know what he wants. Then he's actually perpetuating that line of thinking of you got to get discrete tasks or it's too hard.
Yeah. Well, you have that in a lot of cases. You'll explain something to somebody, and I don't know, sometimes maybe I approach it, or I look at it sometimes and gauge it by bad input in, bad input out. But sometimes, I mean, the input can be so minuscule, it's easy to kind of connect the dots to it. It's like telling someone to go get a bucket of steam. You could say it very, 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 very genuinely and go, hey, just can you go get me a bucket of steam? They're back there and thing. And people will go, oh, okay. And they'll wander off. And that was a long running joke and a lot of hangers that I was in. Go get some, but others will be like, shut up. I mean, they either know, right, or they can connect it. That's an analogy, really. But you always have these instances where some individuals just can't connect those dots quickly. And in some cases, that I guess we could call it common sense, you need to be able to connect dots quickly with little information because it's the quickest way of relaying information. having someone on the other
Yeah.
side has common sense is more effective, more efficient. You know?
Yeah, for sure. It should stimulate. If I give you an ambiguous problem, it should because it's a complexity in there, right? There's a lot of uncertainty. It should stimulate. Okay, I have this ball in my head that's a problem. These other balls of okay, this is how I'm going to start figuring out how to solve the problem. Should stimulate this network of actions that you have to do just to get started. Because the first problem may be, I know what he wants, but I have no idea what to do, how to get started on
Yeah,
that. So you may just have to go ask, hey, you ever seen this before? You ever done this? And that,
yeah,
that's acceptable too.
yeah, yeah. Someone's asking, what is the biggest challenge you face as a leader?
Right now, it's a challenge, but it's a good challenge and it suits my personality. But kind of like I referenced earlier, is all the people that I have to get to participate in complex problem solving with me, none of them work for me. They all work for somebody else. They all work for the sub organizations of the command. So it's very tricky in conveying that the problem set is worth getting them to invest their brain power and time in and helping me solve. Um, but just getting them to the meeting sometimes can be challenging because they have their own sort of things going on. So I like to well, I'll characterize myself as doing fairly good at it because I've got a fairly large group of people that I can rely on from across the net, from across the organization, to come in. And what I'll do is I'll dry erase board. Here's where I think we have a problem, and then let everybody sort of hash it out and talk back and forth while I'm kind of drawing stuff on the dry erase board, just codifying what they're talking about. But getting input and getting commitment and getting people to that don't work for you, mind you, getting people to invest their time and energy into a project
Yeah,
that it's good for them, but it's a project for the command at large that needs to happen. And some of these problems have existed for 5 years. So for the most part, everybody agrees, yes, this problem needs to be fixed, but for some reason we weren't able in this 5 years to come together, agree on a solution, then actually implement it. Because you know implementing it and changing your behaviors and changing the way you present decision points and all that is actually very hard. And it's met with a lot of resistance because it's the initial phases of presenting very complex problems to a 4-star commander. There's so many layers and so many interacting variables. The initial phases look very sloppy and don't look good. So it takes a lot of patience with these people to watch, practice, come up with a methodology, watch, implement it, see where it didn't work, come back, do it again. And that's kind of the phase we're in right now. But I've got a lot of commitment. The team's working really well. I know it's at least as much their own personalities as it is my leadership ability.
yeah,
But that's probably the example you're looking for.
yeah. Do you gauge the people inside your team? Do you kind of gauge their progress in a way and kind of take them backwards, like much like I started off the show of asking you if you could go back when you first entered the military, what would you say to you at that time? Do you kind of take them back in the time and go, look, this is where you were, this is what you're doing, this is your trajectory, you're doing good, or constructive criticism going, you're not, you were here, you were doing better when you walked in, and now you're going down. How do we bring you back up again?
For my team now, no. I do. There's one officer on the team who's getting ready to go into a battalion command, so I do a lot of one-on-ones with him. But the broader team, that's not really my role because I'm not their direct leader. They do things like that with their immediate supervisors. But in my previous job, that was definitely my role, and I would have those one-on-one sessions with each of the people. I was either the direct supervisor or the senior raider, the second level up supervisor. I would have those one-on-ones with folks. I try to do it quarterly, but it's probably more like every 4 months. But I definitely do that. People need to hear that. And the way I would do it usually is I would get them to tell me their own assessment of themselves and see how close they were, because emotional intelligence and self-awareness is so important. that if your report about yourself is the exact opposite of the way I see you, there's a problem.
Yeah. So there's something that's done. I've never experienced it. I've never been. I've been lucky enough to never have to go through one of these. But they do these assessments now where they give you just a questionnaire to fill out, and you have to basically kind of talk about how well you think you're doing, some challenges that you're having, challenges you're not having, things you think you excel at. And then of course your supervisor fills that out too. And then you guys kind of come together and you exchange paperwork and you kind of look it over. That, in my opinion, I wouldn't want to be in a leadership position or in a position where I had to turn something like that into leadership, because what happens if one of you are completely wrong on particular aspects? It could be embarrassing either way. How do you avoid those? How do you keep it kind of in the gray area, so to speak?
We actually do those. We do 360 assessments for a lot of the selection processes. It's a requirement now for like selection for command. They do personality assessments. They do 360 assessments. So your subordinates, your peers, and your supervisors will, for the last 10 years, will contribute to these things. Um, I would say in general, they're good. The problem is if you do it once, it's probably not going to change your behavior if the behavior change is needed. Um, they need to have follow-ups or follow-throughs, and B, you've got to actually, so you got to be honest. So even if what you're putting on there, is not something you want your boss to be aware of or whatever, you have to be honest on that stuff. And it because I've done them, right? So if you get some feedback and you say, "Wow, I didn't know that about myself," and then you just do nothing about it, then it's obviously not all that useful. You need periodic sort of reassessments and periodic checks on, ideally, someone watching you all the time saying, "Did you change this behavior?"
Yeah.
One example I can give you from one of mine was, um, I I have a tendency to be overly intimidating. And again, think of this in context of personality style. So if you get a feedback that says something that is innate to your personality, your characteristics is unsettling to people around you, you know, you could acknowledge it, but that might be hard to change depending on how deeply embedded it is. And I think mine, I'm a big guy and I'm bald, and I think the intimidating thing sort of resonated with me, and I committed. I'm going to do whatever I have to do to not be intimidating. But at the end of the day, I think it boils down to if I'm in a meeting and I'm just not smiling, I look like I'm mad. So I have to work on how do I hold my face so that people don't interpret me as
just
as
sit and grin. That's way more
yeah,
unsettling,
yes.
if you're just sitting there with this. It's like, what's
Yeah.
wrong with that guy? I'm trying
I
to
don't know if that
curb my
fixes the problem.
behaviors.
I'm more uncomfortable now with you grinning at me. But yeah, just as an example.
Exactly.
So
Yeah.
so I worked on that, but at the end of the day, like that was probably 10 or 12 years ago. I think now I do it less, just because this is just my face, man. So just natural
Yeah.
face look.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I got friends that they're always stoic. I mean, it doesn't matter that you could take them to the best comedy show ever and they'll kind of laugh. They really enjoy it, but it's just
Mhm.
their personality. It's just who they are. And that's just how it is. And then there's the other people like me that just, laughing at everything all the time. That makes me good
That's
for
okay.
radio.
Laughing is good, man.
Yeah, it's good.
Laughing is medicine.
Yeah, it is. It's good for the body. All right, so we got more questions here. Man, you got them lined up, buddy. All right, so this one, let's see.
Good.
How does this one go? Oh, that's 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, all right, I'll go with this one. This one looks good. All right, keeping different leaders to work collaboratively and consistently across multiple teams with competing priorities can be sticky. Do you think setting terms of reference really work, or is there a better approach to encourage constructive collaboration?
Ooh, that's a complicated question. So constructively and collaboratively. So terms of reference may be the way to go. It's important to understand what the required output needs to be. So if you want to talk collaboration, then what you're really talking about is someone's view of the problem we're solving and what the required outputs are, in contrast or perhaps complementary to their own personality styles and their own biases towards the problem. So, like we referenced in the first hour, you're going to need to conduct some unbiased analysis of the problem set, which I think facilitates collaboration to some extent. You're going to need to understand around this room who are the people that are going to disagree, because I have them in my groups. Who are the people that are basically going to point out the problems in every situation,
Yeah.
whether or not the problem actually matters? Like, some people just like pointing out problems, so you've got to be aware of those problems.
Yeah.
What I like, so in my meetings, I stopped inviting people who are just the sort of the naysayers, negative Nancy's, who for some reason people just enjoy trying to derail problem solving.
Yeah.
I don't know what that is, but anyway, so that's the sort of the collaboration front, is understanding who you're dealing with, understanding again, if you've got one of these teammates that isn't really interested in solving the problem, they're just interested in pointing out the mistakes you're making.
Hmm.
They're not all that helpful. They can probably go away from the team.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
But that's part of it. The disparate leadership styles, the disparate inputs, the establishing what the required outputs are on the end, and we're establishing the problem solving methodology. And the first step of defining the problem, I think, brackets that whole process.
Yeah. You know what? I can't believe that this second hour has flown by. It's already midnight here. It's like
Yeah.
on like that. I got lots of more questions lined up, and we're out of time. Damn it! So I guess they're gonna just have to buy your book. Which we're going to get into right now.
They
Where
can
to
buy
do
the
that?
book.
Yeah, I think they will. So, all right. So you got
Yeah.
two types of people out there. Obviously, you got people out there that are leaders, that are already leading. Do you suggest that they read the first book first and then go into the second one just to cover everything? It's got course one, part two, or can they jump around? Can they do the second one and then do the first one?
Yeah, either one. You can read either one first. You don't know shit about leadership is going to be much more in depth. I don't want to call it technical, but it does dig into the weeds in sort of an interesting way about the reasons leaders behave the way they do. This book will be out here in about a week, so just be on the lookout for it. The first book is kind of, if you're interested in, if you want to kind of take a look and explore why you maybe or leaders around you are failing or not performing at optimal levels. There's an evolutionary reason for that. There's a neuroscientific personality-based reason for that. You can kind of explore that. And I think what the first one does, the Leadership and Competence Index, is allows people to acknowledge faults that are human nature. There's no malevolence behind them for most of those faults, and just address them, acknowledge them, and move forward as a better leader.
Right. Right. Well, for the first year, we'll be putting links and advertisements rolling through on our website that link back to your books and where to get them. And they'll be on this particular interview. It'll be on there. So hopefully people, if they're looking for it and listen to this on different podcasts or replaying, we'll have all the information on the website, theundergrounddaily.com, and where to get it. And do you have a website that people can go to if they wanted to contact you for various reasons or, whatever?
Yeah, I'm summaryleadership.com.
All right. We'll put that in there as well. I've really enjoyed this. This has been fantastic, and I'd like to do it again because there's so much more I want to cover off, especially with all the great questions that have been coming in from the listeners. So if we can maybe do that in the future, that'd be fantastic.
Happy to. I had a great time.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much for being with us, and we'll let you go and get on with your day. It is midnight here in New Zealand, of course, and I'm not exactly sure, but I think Jill is still out there with us somewhere. Maybe she might be in there somewhere. She will be uploading some information onto the website as well for tonight's show. It'll probably take probably about 8 hours before it's all finished and this show is uploaded. But we want to thank everybody for joining us. Send me email at captainjack@wprtradio.com, wprtradio.net. Thank you very much. And we'll see you next time. Till then, ta-ta.